Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Hoops Hall of Fame podcast. I want to address a question that I get asked a lot, and I've been getting asked a lot lately, and that is about weightlifting, specifically weightlifting for vertical jump and weightlifting for basketball. Obviously, a lot of basketball players, their goals are to increase their vertical jump, and we all know strength is one of the biggest components to vertical jump. So I want to first talk about why strength is important for vertical jump development. Vertical jump is a measurement of power, and the equation for power is force times acceleration, meaning that it's how much force you can generate and then how quickly you can generate that force. So in our case for vertical jump development, this power measurement, the strength component would come in the force part of the equation, meaning that how much strength our muscles can generate will determine, the amount of force that we can apply to the ground and the amount of time it takes to execute a vertical jump movement, which is usually about 0.2 to 0.1 seconds, somewhere in there, depending on the type of jump and how quickly you jump. Everybody's slightly different. But it's that force component. That's where the strength comes in the vertical jump. So we need to be able to apply a lot of force relative to our body weight, meaning that we don't want to be huge necessarily, but we also need to have a certain level of muscle and a certain level of strength, which I'll touch on a little bit later. It's actually the next point, or the point below that, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But the next thing I want to talk about are the exercises, the exercise selection that you choose for vertical jump. Probably the most common one would be the typical back squat. It's probably the most common exercise, the most effective exercise. It depends on the individual. Usually taller players will have a harder time squatting, and typically basketball players are taller. Usually, 6'3", 6'4", or taller, you're going to have a harder time squatting. But there are plenty of other exercises. The back squat is probably the best. Front squats are really good. Really any type of squat, single leg squats, Bulgarian split squats where you have your back leg elevated on a bench behind you and then you squat down on the front leg. You can do this with a barbell or with dumbbells. Typically dumbbells are what's typically prescribed. Lunges, step-ups, glute ham raises, hip raises, deadlifts, obviously. Calf raises, again, are something that's not really, a lot of programs prescribe calf raises. A lot of players think calf raises are some magical exercise. Honestly, I've done calf raises before. I can't say they hurt. Some trainers say they actually hurt your vertical jump. I haven't seen that they hurt, but I can't say they've helped either. So not saying the calves aren't important, but in terms of strength or muscle development in the calves, you don't really need it. What you need the calves to be able to do is be really springy off the ground. So the best exercise for the calves would be jump rope, line hops, pogo jumps, things like that where you're on your toes and you're making your lower extremities, your calves, your Achilles tendon, your ankle complex really springy off the ground. Those are the best exercises for that area. But in this podcast, we're addressing mainly strength. So again, calf raises are not really necessary. You don't need to be doing them. So those are some of the best exercises. If I think of some more as we're going along, I'll list them. But now I want to touch on the difference between high reps versus low reps. And I'll kind of give you an idea of the difference between the two, at least how I typically break it up. Low reps I would say is anything under 5. So like 4, 3, 2, 1. And high reps would be like 6 or higher. Usually 6 to 15 for our lifting movements for basketball. Even 12 is probably the upper echelon. I wouldn't even maybe go higher than 12 for our purposes. But what is the difference between the two? Well, in general, lower reps also, not just lifting lower reps, but when you're lifting lower reps, you're able to lift a heavier weight. So lifting a heavier weight for lower reps typically will develop strength. And higher reps with a lower weight, typically we'll focus more on actual muscle development, meaning breaking down the muscle tissue and making it bigger, essentially. Now, how does this work? Well, when we're lifting a heavier weight, the muscles have less time to actually get broken down, but because the weight is heavier, the central nervous system plays a bigger role in that it has to recruit more muscle fibers to actually lift the weight, meaning that sometimes all the muscles that we have within our body right now, like we're doing a squat, for example, and we're doing a really heavy squat, sometimes we don't actually need to activate every single muscle that we have available within our body. But when we're lifting a super heavy weight, our central nervous system is trained to recruit more of the muscle that we have to lift that weight to accomplish the goal. We've all heard the stories of the woman who lifted the car off the child that was trapped under the car, and obviously she wasn't a weightlifter, she wasn't huge, but her body was able to recruit the muscle that she had. So that shows you how strong that you really are capable of being, when obviously that was a life or death situation. And we can't necessarily reach that level in our everyday life, but doing strength training on a regular basis will basically train your body to recruit more of the muscle that you actually have available. So typically in our circumstances for vertical jump development, like I said, we want to be strong but not have a ton of weight, because when we're jumping, we have to move our body off the ground, right? So the more weight we have, the harder it's going to be to get that weight off the ground. So in general, having a high level of strength, which means heavier weights, lower reps, will typically be better for our purposes. But this isn't always the case when we're designing a program, as I'll get into a little bit later. And you don't always want to be doing like powerlifting movements like 1 rep maxes or things like that. Specifically if we're basketball players, you don't necessarily want to be doing that, because it's going to take too much out of your system for skill training for games. So I just wanted to briefly describe the difference between the two for you guys, so you kind of understand this on a kind of macro level or a bigger level, so you can kind of design your own programs as you go along. That's the ultimate goal. But again, higher reps, lower weight, or lower reps, higher weights will develop strength. Lower weight, higher reps will actually put the muscle under greater tension, because we're lifting for a longer period of time. So the muscle gets broken down more, which results in more muscle. Now, obviously, the more muscle that we have, the more potential for strength that we have, because the more muscle we have, like I said, the more the central nervous system has to activate. But like I said, the central nervous system typically doesn't actually activate as many muscle fibers as we have available. But that's the difference between high reps versus low reps. We already talked about exercises, so now I want to get into frequency and volume. Frequency is the amount that we lift per week, for example. And volume would be the number of sets and reps, more so the sets that we do for a particular exercise or in an entire workout, or in an entire week, for example. I get asked, how many times should I squat per week? How much should I lift per week for basketball? Again, this depends on your goals, what you're trying to accomplish with the lifting, if your strength development, your muscle development is one of your primary goals, or if it's just something that you are kind of doing to improve or even maintain. Obviously, your goals, the time of the season that you're in, will dictate this. But in general, I've found that for lower body, it's best for basketball players to stick to about 2 times a week. You can do 3 times a week. I wouldn't recommend squatting heavy 3 times per week. You can do it. Again, it depends. If your primary goal is to just increase your strength for vertical jump, you could get away with 3 times per week, but you're probably going to have to cut your skill training, and definitely you're playing full court basketball way down if you're going to actually see results. So typically I would recommend 2 times per week for basketball players. If you're doing, for example, squatting on a Monday, on a Wednesday you could do like a lighter lower body workout with like single leg squats and split squats and lunges. And then on a Friday you could go back to like a squat, like a front squat or a deadlift, you could break it up like that, so you're not doing like a compound movement like a squat or a deadlift. 3 times per week, you're doing it 2 times per week, but you can still get in, a unilateral type workout in that in-between day. But typically 2 times per week is best. Obviously, for basketball, we want to focus on upper body as well. So it's a typical good schedule is to do an upper-lower body split where you do lower body and upper body twice per week. You could do it all on the same day, like a Monday you do lower body and upper body, and then a Thursday or Friday you do it again. Or you could do a Monday, lower body, Tuesday, upper body, take Wednesday off, Thursday, lower body, Friday, upper body. You could do it 3 times per week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. But again, you have to pay more attention then to the types of exercises and the volume that you're doing in those workouts. If you're going to do 3 times per week, you probably want to stick to 3 or less, 2 to 3 sets of your exercises. Because you want to make sure that you're not tiring yourself out too much so you can come back in on that next training day and still make improvements. But like I said, usually 2 times per week. I'm going to try to stick to mainly lower body in this podcast because, like I said, upper body does play a role in vertical jump, but in terms of strength for vertical jump in the upper body, it's not too important. So if you're trying to get max gains, focusing on lower body is going to be much more important for vertical jump. If you just focused upper body, for example, you're not going to get really any gains. So lower body is what we need to focus on. So again, 2 times per week is what I'd recommend, specifically if you're a basketball player. So you can still be in the gym working on your skills 4 to 6 times per week. You can still play full court, 1 to 2 times per week, which would be ideal in our situation. So again, that's what I'd recommend for frequency, for volume. Usually 2 to 3 sets. Like I said, 3 sets is probably best for the majority of the exercises. You can do 4 on some of them, but again, anywhere from 2 to 4 sets is probably the best for our exercises. So for example, you could do a back squat for like 3 sets of 6. Then you could do a lunge for 3 sets of 8 each leg. And then you could do something like a glute ham raise to work on that posterior chain, or Romanian deadlift is another exercise I didn't recommend. A stiff leg deadlift for 3 sets of 10, something like that. That'd be a very effective strength workout for basketball. Again, so 2 to 4 sets for the exercises would be ideal, and depending on the frequency would determine the number of sets that we do for the exercises. So again, that's where you can see the importance of having a training program, the importance of having a trainer, so that they can take everything that you're doing into consideration and design a good program. Obviously, the more experience you have with this, the better you are equipped to do it yourself, which is what I would really hope for you guys. Through listening to podcasts like this, reading books, articles, training yourself over time with programs, you kind of learn how to do these things on your own. Another thing I wanted to touch on in terms of the high reps versus low reps, typically in a program, we'll start off, if we're doing an 8-week or 12-week program, for example, we'll start off lifting higher reps, so somewhere like 6 to 10 reps typically, to really build a certain level of muscle. Like I said, for strength, you need to have some muscle, and then the strength component, lifting heavier weights, will allow you to use more of the muscle that you have. And just, starting off a program, we want to make sure that your body's in shape, that you're not just jumping to super heavy weights because you could end up injuring yourself. So a lot of training programs, it depends on the player and obviously and where they're at, but like online programs that are just cookie cutter type programs, typically they'll start off lifting 6 to 10 reps for an exercise to get you acclimated to the lift, to build some muscle. And then later on in the program, like the last 4 weeks or so, they'll be lifting heavier weights for 3 to 5 reps to really take advantage of the muscle that we've developed, and also, like we said, to build that strength. And you've been doing the program for a while, so you should be ready to go and be less likely to hurt yourself lifting heavier weights. So that's typically how you would start off a program. If you're a younger player or someone who's not experienced with lifting, or you haven't lifted in a while, I would suggest starting with higher reps, and then as you get better and get more used to it, you can start lifting heavier weights for lower reps. So that's how I break down that in your training program. And again, if there's any other questions about vertical jump and lifting, please comment or email me or write me on Facebook. I'll probably make more podcasts addressing vertical jump development and weightlifting. So I hope that addressed a lot of the questions that I've been getting from you guys about vertical jump and weightlifting. Again, please let me know if there's anything else you'd like to know. And please subscribe on YouTube. And thanks for listening today to the Hoops Hall of Fame podcast.